we're filling up nicely. So if I can start us off, this is an open space session, and the idea is that it's participation from everybody. So I'm hopeful that you're all going to comply with that and participate. What I wanted to do was just start with this document, which is the Mobility for Better Learning document. And some of you will have seen it already, no doubt. It is the Mobility Strategy 2020 for the European higher education area. And there's lots of recommendations, suggestions, and actions in here. But what I wanted to do was to just draw on those that are in relation to institutions in particular, and then look at how we might assist institutions in going forward with this mobility agenda. I have to say I have a personal motive. I now hold the position of Associate Dean for Student Mobility at my university, and I have the target of 15% mobility by 2017, 15% by 2017. And as you know, UK's outward mobility is usually pretty low, so it's a fairly ambitious target. But so I'm very interested to hear what people are doing. So what I want to do first is just take some of the statements from this document and just read them to you, and then we'll come back to them and look at particular ones to see how we might be going about this and how we might help each other to meet this mobility target, which after all is one of the very important aspects of the European higher education area. So the first points that I just wanted to read out are those associated with the defining of the mobility. So within this document, item number 2 is we reaffirm and elaborate our mobility target formulated at Leuven-Louvain-la-Neuve and lay down additional targets. So A, we measure physical mobility in all 3 cycles of the Bologna process. Well, there's no particular surprise in that, but obviously a lot of mobility is concentrated in the first 2 cycles, so it's just a reaffirmation to all of us that mobility is associated with all 3 cycles. Item B under 2, we include in our mobility target the period spent abroad corresponding to at least 15 ECTS credit points or 3 months within any of the 3 cycles, as well as stays in which a degree is obtained abroad. Okay, so minimum of 15 ECTS credits or 3 months for credit mobility, as they call it in the document, or stays in which a degree is obtained, degree mobility. So it's just setting the scene. Okay. So again, an issue that will impact on institutions, the issue of the provision of data. So it says, in support of the specific indicators, we invite the European Commission to develop and provide data. So one of them on various mobility types, degree and credit mobility. In addition, also short-term mobility corresponding to less than 15 ECTS credit points. So the reason why I draw attention to that is because the issue there is how is your institution monitoring mobility, and is it monitoring all aspects of mobility? And again, there's a personal note here. I know from my experience at my institution, we're fairly good at recording and monitoring all the mobility that gets undertaken under Erasmus because there's a formal process for that. But what we discover is there are lots of hidden mobility, especially in the doctoral cycle, where once you start to probe, you find that there is mobility, but there is no mechanism currently of recording it. So again, it's just a debating point later might be about the issue of how are we recording mobility and how can we assist each other on understanding how to do that. So data on the mobility of early stage researchers, teachers and staff in higher education. So again, the issue of how are we reporting that and recording it. Do you know all those mobility routes, and do you record all of it? Or again, are you focused on those that are funded through Erasmus? Do you record those matters that are not under that control? And on the social dimension of mobility. Okay, under item 3, we strive for open higher education systems and better balanced mobility. So one point here is that joint study programs, multilateral summer schools, and regional forms of higher education collaboration are promising instruments to support a better balance in mobility flows. The return of graduates to their home countries can be supported through the creation of attractive working conditions and specific incentive schemes. So again, we might look at that aspect. Another point from the document, in each of our countries, we commit to intensifying structural collaboration with developing and emerging countries and using appropriate measures to motivate more Europeans, in particular, to study, teach and research in these countries. At the same time, in order to become more attractive for students, early stage researchers, teachers and other staff from non-EUHEA countries, we call on the EHUA countries to develop new study programs and better promote programs and other incentives for mobility periods in the EHEA. So again, that's really a precursor to where certainly the European Union is going with regards to Erasmus for All. But the issue is, how are institutions responding to that? How are we responding to mobility from outside the EHEA and out of it? On the issues of dismantling obstacles to mobility, so one point is to work with higher education institutions to increase the quality and relevance of mobility periods, ensuring that they contribute to high academic standards, to the employability as well as the linguistic and intercultural competence of graduates, and to the excellence of academic staff. Now, I'd add one point to that. When you send a student for a period of mobility and they return with the transcript from their host institution, it's your duty to recognize that transcript and incorporate that period of study into your home transcript. We all understand that within Erasmus. How many of us exchange students with outside the Erasmus scheme? Do we stick to those high quality assurance standards when we're not under the watchful eye of the Erasmus grant? So that's an issue to look at. And also, if you receive a student from another institution and you dutifully give them your transcript, you send them back to their home institution, how often do you liaise with that institution to check that they truly recognize that period of study? It's not a requirement within the reporting, but do you see that as being good practice, that you check that that period of mobility has been recognized? Because in reality, if the home institution isn't incorporating and recognizing your period of study, it's an unusual sort of partnership. So I've always thought it's a strange asymmetry with the reporting mechanism, but certainly you ought to be responsible, I think, for checking that they do take your period of study seriously and they do incorporate it. A couple of other points. We will give extra attention and opportunity to underrepresented groups to be mobile and recognize the importance of adequate student support services to this end. So we might look at the issues of how are we supporting underrepresented groups in mobility. Do we take efforts to make sure that they have, as we say, a fair crack at the whip? As a prerequisite for mobility and internationalization, we support the teaching of foreign languages at all levels, starting from primary education. We also strongly support the improvement of the language capabilities of teachers. A very poignant point for the UK, I have to say. An important one that comes up time and time again, and I don't know if you've read the communique, but you will see a very strong affirmation of the concept of learning outcomes. It's linked to the learning and it's linked to the assessment methodologies. And that's reiterated in this statement by the following statement. Furthermore, we mandate the Bologna follow-up group to conduct a needs analysis among students and higher education institutions to take stock of and to map existing admission systems to collect samples of good practice and to explore the potential of using common standards for the description of study programs. So looking at how we describe our study programs is an important aspect. Ways to facilitate access to relevant information while avoiding additional burden on institutions, making best use of information already available. How universities involved in organising Erasmus Mundus Masters classes or their successors could cooperate in setting up a joint internet-based admission system. Those of you, anybody here involved in Erasmus Mundus? Okay, and you're probably aware of the website, the quality assurance website that tells you, gives you assistance as to how you should develop these things. But the issue of joint admissions comes up there. The possibility of enhancing cooperation in verifying the documentation of foreign qualifications in order to support institutions during the admission process. So I'm sure those of you that are involved in Erasmus Mundus will have come across this quite a number of times now, looking at how do you make sure that you're admitting fairly and equally across all the different states. We will improve the communication of the individual, institutional and social benefits of periods spent abroad. This communication should target parents, career advisors and students in order to systematically record the private and social returns of learning mobility. Also with regards to the employability of higher education graduates, we suggest regular accompanying research and particularly the preparation of graduate surveys. So again, what are you doing in your own institutions and what's happening in your own regions or countries to try and promote and push this so that mobility becomes a core item. Some of you, I'm sure, will be able to tell us that mobility is now a very core item in their own country and students would have a high expectation of going for a period of mobility. Other countries might still be struggling to encourage mobility for a number of reasons. One of them which might be that most students don't feel that it's a necessary item, or there may be language barriers, or there may be financial barriers. So we need to look at all those issues. The communicate also, in this strategy states, we call on higher education institutions, firstly, to adopt and implement their own strategy for their internationalization and for the promotion of mobility in accordance with their respective profile, involving the stakeholders, in particular students, early stage researchers, teachers and other staff in higher education. To pay attention to the mobility and international competence of their staff, in particular to give fair and formal recognition for competencies gained abroad, to offer attractive incentives for their greater participation in internationalization and mobility measures, as well as to ensure good working conditions for mobile staff. To create mobility-friendly structures and framework conditions for mobility abroad, and to develop other possibilities for mobility, such as virtual mobility, and enable non-mobile students to have an international experience at home. Okay, so that's just drawing out points that I thought have direct relevance to institutions. So maybe I'll just give you, as an example, the position that we're at in my particular institution, which obviously has a framework that's relevant to the UK. And then I would really encourage you to say where you think you are and where you might be going with regards to this target, the mobility target of 2020. So as I say, you're all aware that in the UK, we have a very large influx of mobile students and a very low outgoing. We have poor language skills, and certainly mobility is not seen as being something that is, every day, that you'd expect to do it. So it's quite a challenge to say, how would you raise mobility? But in my own university, about 4 years ago, we decided, well, we'll look at the whole thing and see how we could change it. Because clearly, we can see that if you had a situation where any academic that a student spoke to about mobility would give a positive response, would tell them where they need to go, rather than, let's say, getting the response, why would you want to go abroad? Which might be the response from some academics if they're questioning why you'd want to leave their program. How could you possibly get something better than my course by going somewhere else? It's a common response in the past. So you definitely want to change it such that every academic would always give a positive statement to students and would tell them where they need to go. And you would want, let's say, a situation whereby if a student sat in a group of 10, there would be at least 2, 3 that were considering or were going mobile. Because once it becomes more natural, then it grows, it self-perpetuates. So we looked at all those issues and did a lot of promotion. We asked departments to produce mobility windows in degree programs and to create 4-year variants of all 3-year degrees. So we're now at that position now. So if you have a 3-year degree in engineering, you can take a 4-year degree with a year abroad for every degree program. And we created our own bursaries. I think the financial issue is one issue that one has to look at clearly, some of us benefit from being able to give students Erasmus grants, but the question is, what's your institutional commitment? Are you creating your own funds for students to go abroad? Now, there's an element of criticism at the moment to the UK for the increase in fees, the size of the fees now. But in fact, if you look at that fee regime, an element of that has to be given back in bursaries. So I am, as the Associate Dean for Student Mobility, I now have a pot of £20,000 a year to give to students that fall into the widening participation band for a mobility period. So those increased fees do generate income that comes back that allows you to press mobility. So I think one needs to look at the system. I have to say, hand on heart, a lot of my mobility growth is for students going to study in English. I have to say that. That's the reality at the moment. That's the easiest way to increase mobility. It's not, let's say, the pure mobility, but it's the easiest way. But at the same time, this October we will introduce languages for all our students, and so every student will get a free voucher to study alongside their studies one of the languages that they choose, and we hope that in time that will change the position. So we have gone now from a position 2 years ago when my university, which is about 7,000 students, we had 80 outward students. Next year we have 295 predicted. And we haven't started internships abroad yet, which is another issue that I wanted to reflect with people. We're very keen to have as many intern going out as we have study abroad students, and I'd be very interested to hear from anybody else who has already large-scale international outgoing internships and how that's working. Okay, so I'm going to stop. Thank you, Ilias. Time out. And I just encourage people to say if they've got positions where they are already at 20%, or they know that they're going to be at 20%, or how they're going to it. So just try and give us some examples of where you are with regards to this mobility strategy, and in reference to some of those points that I've read out from this document. Who would like to kick off?
Okay, Luc François from Ghent University in Belgium. We are now more or less at 20%. And the measures that you are talking, what you were talking about, we introduced it 20 years ago. So in 2032, you will also have 20%. What we try now to expand outgoing mobility through internships, because we think that more or less the ceiling is reached for studying abroad. The point is that not in all our programs we have internships, but where it is happened, where it's in the program, students are obliged to go abroad. And it's only a problem in the first year, because they said we didn't know that we were forced to go abroad. But once this is accepted, this is a normal situation for them. And the financial point is, in my opinion, for the group that is open for mobility, not the main point. It helps, but it's not the main point.
Fine, thank you. Who would like to go next? Get some more comments? Anybody got some exceptional experiences of mobility, or you're thinking how you might go there?
I can say some words from my country, from Sweden, Linköping University, where we, from the very beginning in 1977, already started to send students abroad, and have done so since then, long before Erasmus was on the map. And now we have understood that it's very important to have engineers who have a very well-trained background in the foreign language. So for engineering programs at my university, 2 programs, industrial engineering and electrical engineering, we have introduced an international variant, which means that during the 5 years of education, they must spend 1 year abroad. It's compulsory to go 1 year abroad, and also to study language during the study time. So they start already from the first year to study one of the following language. It's French, German, Spanish, Mandarin, or Japanese. So they have that possibility, and then they spend a full year in the country where the language is spoken that they have studied. That's one way to, so to say, increase and also to highlight the importance of going abroad and master a foreign language, get acquainted to another culture, etc. So this is a very attractive program, and we have 40 seats in each of these programs. We have so many applicants, one of the most popular programs we have in Linköping today. But for all other students as well, we have always tried to promote going abroad. And from our point of view, it has been a question of liberal view on what they study. To recognize what they do abroad is very essential for us, and we never require them to study subjects that are equal to what we could give in Linköping. Fine if we find, but if they don't find them, it's okay, because they can bring back to my country knowledge that we can't offer in the country, for example. They can find subjects abroad that we don't have in Linköping today, and they can, in that way, import to the country more knowledge than we can offer. So there are many ways to promote studying abroad by being liberal, open, and also talk about it all the time. So we have high figures of students going abroad from Linköping. Sorry to say, we have still higher figures of incoming students to Linköping, but we don't complain about our figures, no.
Okay, who would like to go next? I'm really keen to hear examples. Yeah. This side.
Thank you. My name is Peter, and I'm student representative. I'm coming from Montenegro. As the obstacle of mobility in my country is that usually students don't have enough money to go abroad. And what come up in my mind, what was Anthony was talking about raise a bit of tuition fees, so you can raise a fund where you could give students money to go abroad. For example, at my faculty, there are 100 students who are paying tuition fees. If they would pay 10 euros more or 20 euros more, so you can get one big fund, then you could have maybe 5 students who will get the money to go abroad on the faculty level. It is a small amount, but just imagine if there would be a governmental level, because I don't know there is a fund on the level of government that is given to the students who are going abroad. There are some scholarships given from the embassies of the countries, but I don't know that the government is doing that. So that could be one good example that could do in the future in Montenegro. I just wanted to share it with you.
I think I would take from that, a general statement that a university needs to think about what its commitment is to mobility. And I think the commitment can be expressed in a number of ways. It can be expressed in terms of, let's say, key performance indicators. I mean, if you look at your university strategy, policy, key performance indicators, whatever you want to call them, has the 2020 mobility target been written into those key performance indicators? So is there institutional commitment to take that statement and to put it into your own institution? I have to say, we've done that. I feel a little burdened by it because it's my responsibility to meet that target, but nonetheless, we've made that commitment. The other one would be, and it was in one of the last statements that I read there, the issue of internationalization. So, in one respect, I could say, oh yes, Essex University is very international. We have 40% of students are non-UK, so we're very international. But actually, sometimes if you look at some of the things that we do, we're very parochial. If you were to look at our institutional magazine and you read through it, it seems non-international, I would say, to some extent. If you were to say, if you look at the curriculum, is everybody getting an international experience through the curriculum? Now, we have those statements in the strategy as well. They're less embedded yet, but the issue of how are you internationalizing your institution? And then coming back to this issue of funding, of course, different universities in different countries are funded in many different ways, but at the end of the day, if a university takes mobility in a responsible way, then surely it should be looking at all the ways in which it can raise money to support mobility, whether it be from funds that it generates or whether it be by acting with alumnus. We have quite a lot of activity now around the world with our alumni to see how they can support the mobility by opening doors, by providing sponsors for accommodation, or all sorts of things. Now, so that's taking an attitude, yes, we're going to work really hard to find ways in which we can bring the financial barriers down, because we take that issue importantly. So I think it has to be more than we get an Erasmus grant and we use that to support mobility. It has to be totally embedded within the institution. And I think I'd certainly be very interested to hear from institutions that have that example. Yeah, want to say something?
Thank you. I'm from Russia, and I represent Russian State University for the Humanities, but my colleagues will join me in the statement. Some of the experts in the field of internationalization say that we are facing the midlife crisis. I mean, internationalization is going through midlife crisis, and rethinking internationalization means reviving the corpse. That's one of the opinions of the key experts. But I'd like to support your issue and your point that we should provide international experience for the students at home. So we should speak about two types of mobilities: external mobility when they go abroad and internal mobility. I mean internationalization, internal internationalization. When we provide more courses in English, when we invite more professors from abroad who teach at Russian university, and that's now our policy and our strategy. And the ministry is providing enormous sums of money for the invited world-renowned professors. It's about 150 million. Can you imagine that sum of money? Because the government is trying to encourage world-renowned professors to come and deliver lectures. That's one of the points of internationalization. Another point is you mentioned the question of liaison with the receiving university, whether we check if the period study abroad was recognized. I'd like to give an example. We are involved in Erasmus Mundus III program, which is very nicely coordinated by Turku University in Finland, very well organized coordinators, and every year they're sending questionnaires to us and to the students who have been at us, so that the answers should be honest. So the students are sometimes complaining that their periods abroad are not recognized, and this is a very nice mechanism, feedback from the students to the coordinators, and I think we could spread this model that should be annual just report from both the students who took mobility and from the university. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, who would like to contribute? Yeah.
More and more we are having problem of language, you know. I had a couple of students who wanted to come to Lithuania and to study in mechanical engineering, and the university here is requiring them to know Lithuanian language. I mean, every country is requiring their language to be studied, you know. It's becoming very big problem. We are having problem of having students who know English, but now, I mean, there are a couple of countries we can send students to study in English, and others like Spain, Italy, and now Lithuania and other countries. So how are we going to reach the objective of 20% mobility? This is going to be a big obstacle for the mobility. So we have to decide that, I mean, there should be common language which we know it is English.
Well, I couldn't possibly say that. I think that's about strategy, really. For example, I've been going to different parts of the world recently from my position as in the Faculty of Engineering, looking for internships for engineers. And where have I been going? Well, I've been going to Russia, and I've been going to China, and I've been going to Japan, because I think that those are the countries where if my students have internships as engineers, will be very valuable in the future. So recently I was in Yekaterinburg, and I met with 5 or 6 software companies, and they are very willing to take interns, and the Federal University of the Urals is very willing to provide Russian language studies, and it looks like we're going to work out a 1-year mobility program, which will be a combination of Russian language and then an internship. But I think that's about strategy. I don't think you can say every student, you know, I'm going to try and make everything available. If I look at my faculty of philosophy and art history, then they have a huge amount of work within a Latin American art collection. So, of course, a lot of their students learn Spanish. They go to South America. I was just in Colombia last week. I have a study abroad student there doing very well at the Universidad des Andes, specifically on programs that relate to that. So it's about making it open in the ways that it's relevant for you. And there will be reasons to learn different languages in different places. Some students, for example, we may start a program in a year's time where any student on any degree, whether it be engineering, can stop the degree and take a year abroad just for language. So because they decide, I want Chinese. So China is a good example. We now have students that do two-year abroad in China, because it takes 2 years to get to a competent level of Chinese. So they stop the degree after the second year of the bachelor's. They do 2 years in China, and then they come back for their final year. So I think you just have to decide what it is you want to do and what programs are available and in which subjects. So we're nearly ending up with time. Does anybody have a burning contribution that they wish to make? Yes, at the back there.
I would just like to know if the problem that I would mention exists for other nations than Turkey. We are noticing more and more that, especially for Erasmus students, that we have applications from all around European institutions wishing to come to Turkey. And when we look at the detailed CV of the student, those are students who have been raised in Turkey until the end of the high school and who went for a degree of mobility, a degree in, for example, Germany, and for reducing their living expenses in Germany, they want to benefit from Erasmus grant and come back to Turkey for 1 year living with their families. So are we supposed to call it a mobility?
Say that it's allowed in the system. I know for years we had a similar position with Greek students. When the number of Greek students coming to the year was very large, quite a proportion of those went back to Greece for a period of mobility. It happens. It's maybe not what's intended, but it is actually allowed. So I don't think you could say, I don't want to do that. And in fact, it may be quite enriching for them to do that. You never know. So I think we maybe just have enough for one last contribution. Does anybody wish to say anything about how they're... Can I just say, let's do a show of hands then. Who thinks their institution or institutions that they know of in their country will make the 2020 target? We have one example here, 2. Okay, yes, so possibly. I would say hesitatingly, maybe my institution might. If I can get internship, I would say that if you don't engage in internships, I would encourage you to look at that, and I've been encouraging a lot of institutions to look carefully at that. Some institutions have huge histories of doing this. Others are very new to it. And also within that, you should realize that under the extended charter, you can be the receiver of interns. And that's the other issue that we're just starting to develop. So you could have 90 interns working around your university doing actually very interesting work for you. But if you're going to do that, think carefully about how you're going to design it. And equally well, your partners can provide internships for you at their own institutions. Now, you might think that's a little odd, but in certain areas, you can have people doing junior research within research groups. You can have people working in the International Relations Office. There are a number of things which would be very valuable internships for those students. So don't dismiss internships within your own institutions. It can be a very valuable experience. And I know that some institutions I've talked to have now risen that number very high, almost as high as their study mobility. So I think it's well worth thinking about. Anyway, I think I probably have to stop there because I think we're just about out of time. Yeah, sorry, one last contribution.
Again, a last conclusion that talking about mobility for better learning, speaking about mobility for better learning, we shouldn't aim at percentage, we shouldn't aim at numbers, how many students, but we should aim at quality. You see, at least in Russia, we are very critical of our quality assurance system because it's not quality assurance, it's quantity assurance. How many professors, how many books, how many and how many? You see, and that's what is the key issue in mobility. We should strive not for numbers, but for the quality. And we discussed in our working group today that there should be maybe more trust and more quality assurance in the programs and more internationally accredited curriculum when we speak about dual degrees, double degrees, and other types of degrees. Anyway, thank you.
No, I think it's a fair point. Of course, you don't want mobility without quality. Thank you for that final contribution.